Hello folks, as you can see I've gone for a little bit of a yellow background here today, and the reason for that is because people who study colour apparently have concluded that the colour yellow, or this specific tones of yellow, are apparently proven to calm people more so than any other colour. Now, that's a bit unusual to me because I would have thought that green, or maybe even blue, would have been the most calming colours, but apparently it's yellow. And we're going to need this yellow, calming subconscious in the background because we're going to talk about a topic today that I think is going to annoy a lot of people. And I think that a lot of people won't understand. And I think a lot of people will take it as an attack on them. But it's not intended to be. It's intended to make people zoom out of their own perspectives and see the bigger picture, and perhaps from that understand how they operate within that bigger picture. And so today we're going to talk about how arrested development creates political fanatics. All right, bear with me on this one because there's a lot to take in. So let's start off with number one, arrested development. Arrested development has numerous definitions, and you'll probably get a different one depending on who you ask. But the definition I'm going to go with is undergoing a sustained period of little, if not any, mental development when otherwise expected, resulting in noticeable immaturity. And people often use it to refer to adults who display childish traits. So, for example, if you take, say, Spider-Man back in the 1990s, if there was someone who was 10 years old, like a 10-year-old boy, for example, and they had a Spider-Man poster in their bedroom, pretty much everyone would say, yeah, that's totally normal, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. However, back in the 1990s, if you were 30 years old, right, if you were a 30-year-old man and you had a Spider-Man poster on your wall, people might start to ask if you have special needs, right? Because Spider-Man, of course, being a superhero, it's intended for, it's for young people, right? It's their kind of entertainment, comic books, etc. If you haven't kind of matured a bit in your tastes by 20 years later, people back then would have thought, perhaps there's something wrong with them. However, today, if you look at Spider-Man in the 2020s, again, if there's someone who's 10, again, it's still completely normal if they think that Spider-Man's cool or whatever. But again, now you see that if people are 30 years old and they like superheroes like Spider-Man and have posters of Spider-Man in their rooms or whatever, or in their house, that is also now considered to be totally normal. It is completely acceptable, societally acceptable for adults to like things like superheroes and things like that. On the other side of the coin, if we flip it around from male to female, we take plushies in the 1990s. If you were 10, right, 10-year-old girl who had loads of plushies on their bed or in their bedroom or whatever, again, that would be totally normal, right? Young people tend to sort of look at plushies and give them personalities and sort of use their imagination to pretend that they're real and things like that. However, if you were a 30-year-old woman and you had loads of plushies and your room, looked like a young person's bedroom, again, people would start to think maybe she's got special needs or something, right? Because, by that point, a lot of people would have offspring of their own, right? And never mind still playing with dolls and pretending, acting as if they're young themselves. However, again, same thing, plushies in the 2020s, if someone's 10, again, that's considered totally normal. But now you see 30-year-old women and their bedrooms look the same as they did when they were like 10. It's considered totally normal for women to own these huge collections of animals, plushies, and to sort of give them names and sort of, I don't want to say use them as a substitute for offspring, but perhaps, but it's infantile behaviour is the point I'm trying to make. And the millennial generation, aka people born around the early 1980s to late 1990s, notoriously tend to showcase arrested development in this regard. It's become almost like a meme that the millennials, the people born, not all obviously, but a large chunk, certainly a noticeable chunk of people born in this period, tend to be very childish and haven't really grown up and are displaying traits of as with these examples here, arrested development. They're showing that they're acting like they did 20 years ago, and they haven't matured out of these tastes, if you would. And there's numerous reasons why this could be the case, by the way. The first one is economic difficulties, right? So it's a pretty well-known fact that house prices are rather unaffordable across the Western world, and when you move out from your parents, that's seen as a non-trivial moment. That's a major milestone of development, because you have to handle the bills on your own. You have to handle the house, right? Whereas if you live with your parents and they're kind of doing all that for you, again, there's not really that need, that push to develop independence mentally in the ways that normally would be the case. Another one is elders living longer, which might sound like a bizarre reason to have arrested development, but it kind of links into what we just said with economic difficulties. If old people, they tend to have the most assets, right? When they die, the next generation inherits those assets. Oftentimes, that inheritance can help them get their own place, or to have more opportunities, perhaps start a family, something like that. If elders live longer, then that inheritance is not happening, right, under normal circumstances. And so you've got the elder generations hoarding all this wealth, and wealth is really opportunity, if you think about it, for young people. Well, then it shouldn't be surprising then that the millennial generation tends not to mature as quickly as older generations did, because they have less opportunities to do so. Another one is religious collapse. Religion, whether you like it or loathe it, tends to instill this desire in people to have these strict values, and men must do this, women must do this, adults must do this. It sort of makes people, it inspires people to be brave as well, almost, because growing up requires a certain level of bravery, right, rather than just languishing in these childish kind of cycles of behaviour. And religion can kind of give people courage to do that. There's a lot of, you could say there's a lot of flaws with religion as well, but one of the things it definitely does is instill these values of courage, and you have religion puts an idea into people's head that they have a responsibility to do something for themselves, their family, their friends, and for the society, right? It sort of forces maturity onto people in many ways, and the collapse of that, it could be seen as one reason. And another reason, of course, is individualist progressivism, right? I mean, in religion's place, Christianity's place to be specific, you have this new individualism, this progressivism that says, nothing you do is bad. As long as you're not, harming others, you can do whatever you want for yourself. You can be obese, you can not have offspring, you can live with your parents until you're 60 years old, right? Like, no one should judge you. There's nothing wrong with you. If someone judges you, that's the society that's at fault, right? And this kind of behaviour it does the opposite of what religion kind of does. It makes people cowardly, or it gives people an excuse to be cowardly. It gives people an excuse not to change. I mean, for example, just me pointing out the Spider-Man and the plushie example, the male and female examples of what arrested development could look like. There'll be some angry people who are telling me that why am I judging people if they're not doing anything wrong? And it's like, no, you are doing something wrong. You just don't realize it, because you're doing it to yourself. And when you harm yourself, you're harming others around you, because the person you could have been is not, if that makes sense, right? And so that's the way that people should view this, but people don't. However, all this and everything I've just said is not really the kind of arrested development that I want to talk about today. This is a big deal. And, I've mentioned this many times in the past in numerous ways, but this is not really the kind of arrested development, that this common type of arrested development, this isn't really what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is what I call number 2, unrefined personalities. So if you look at the stages of life here, you've got your childhood, which is like from 0 to 12. And during people's childhood, they simply follow whatever their guardians believe, right? So if you grow up in a Christian household or a Muslim household, the chances are you're going to be a Christian, you're going to be a Muslim, right? Young people take after their parents. If your parents have conservative political beliefs, you're going to be a conservative. If your parents have progressive political beliefs, you're going to be a progressive. Mostly because you don't really understand politics, don't really care about it, and you just mimic what your parents would say because you want to make them proud, or you want to be on their good side or whatever. The point I'm trying to make is that young people don't really have any original thoughts of their own. They kind of they're like a sponge. They just kind of like absorb the knowledge that is presented in their immediate surroundings, and that is them. Right, and that is obviously dictated primarily by the family, but also by the education system, but mostly by the family. Bottom line is they don't have an original personality of their own. During the teenage years, from 13 to 19, this is where people start to create a personality based on their own original beliefs. Going through that period, people obviously change physically, but they don't just change physically, they also change mentally. People start to question the religion of their parents, the political beliefs of their parents. They start to try to weave a personality of their own and look at their place in society, or look at society and question, like what exactly is going on here. And so, you start to see, like, this is why parents tend to consider teenagers to be really annoying, right? Because it's like, when people are young, in their childhood, they tend to be very calm and very nice, and in the teenage years, it's very, very angry and very, like, just because it's a period where people are unstable. They're developing a personality of their own, and learning about the world. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're guaranteed to rebel against their parents' beliefs, by the way, but it typically means that if there is a stage where this is going to happen, it will be that stage, as people try to become a person of their own, rather than just a miniature extension of their parents, if you would. And then in adulthood, of course, 20 plus, people fully have a personality based on their own original beliefs, right? At that point, if you're really a Christian or really a Muslim, what your political beliefs are, or at least you have your own political beliefs, not just because your parents indoctrinated you to believe them, but because you actually believe them. Right, so you can stand up on your own independently and say, I'm a conservative because, I'm a progressive because. And these are kind of the stages of life. Typically, it's like no personality, a personality in progress, a full personality, right? But I want to focus specifically on this little period here, from the ages of about 20 to 24. And this is what I call having an unrefined personality, right? In the sense that during those ages, you have a personality of your own, as I just said, right? You've developed your own religious and political beliefs, but it's unrefined in the sense that because you have so little life experience, because you've spent so little time on this earth, your personality, your beliefs have not necessarily been means tested with reality. Okay, and so during this time, what you notice is that a lot of people tend to be very insufferable, actually, because they tend to be very confident in their religion, confident in especially their political beliefs, despite the fact that 9 times out of 10, they don't know what they're talking about. But that's not really their fault, that's because their personality is unrefined. And as time goes by, throughout the rest of the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, etc., their personality starts to refine. And it's because they have life experience. And with that life experience, with that refined personality, people become more sharp people, right? And, by the way, the beliefs they have might change over time as a result of that refinement. Basically, the unrefined personality is the worst version of someone, but, by definition. Yes, they're an adult, but it's the worst version of them, mentally. And to sort of give you an example of personality refinement, I want to talk about a friend of mine. And I know he'll watch this, and he's given me permission to talk about this. So thanks very much to him. But I'm going to talk about a very embarrassing example of personality refinement. So I have a friend of mine who, in his early 20s, he used to go to protests like this, protesting public sector cuts, specifically to education. And the reason for this is I believe he was a university student. And he would, he's not pictured there, by the way, that's just a random picture. But he would go to these protests, and hold up these signs that are like, fund universities, stop government cuts. And he would go crazy about this. And he would be, there with like the megaphones, a real activist, right? And then fast forward to his late 20s, and there he is campaigning for the party of austerity, the British Conservative Party, with then candidate and Prime Minister Theresa May and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond. So there, obviously I've blurred out his face, right? But there, there's a massive difference there. The same decade, at the start of it, he's protesting public sector cuts. At the end of it, he's campaigning for the party of austerity, right now. So you might be thinking, well, what happened there? That's like a polar opposite. Personality. What you need to focus on is the middle part. What happened in the mid-20s? What happened to turn him from that to this? And what happened was he graduated from university and started his own business, right? And his business became very successful. And because his business was very successful, he had to pay a lot of taxes. And so you can see here how when he was in university, didn't pay a penny of tax ever. Well, it's very easy to protest public sector cuts and, how dare you, government, blah, 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 blah. When you're the one paying the taxes, right? Well, now you want the cuts, right? Because you want to pay less in tax. Now, many people would say, well, this guy's a hypocrite, right? Like his circumstances change and then he changes as a result. But it's like, yes, of course. There's nothing wrong with that. He's not a traitor. He's not like a betrayer. This is a logical thing to do. It's like if you have no experience being a businessman, a successful businessman, then you're going to be perfectly fine with high taxes. If you do, you're going to want as low taxes as possible because you feel like you're being robbed, right? This is a fine example, I think, a healthy example, though many will disagree, no doubt, of personality refinement. There's absolutely nothing wrong with changing your religious or political opinions based on your own personal circumstances. Because with life experience, that's inevitable. Of course you're going to do that. If you want a high-profile example of personality refinement, not just someone I know, but someone who perhaps you know, well, we need to look no other than the current British Prime Minister at the time of recording, Keir Starmer, who in his 50s at the moment, I believe is in his 50s. There he is, he's sort of a formal suit-wearing centrist dad. Kind of looks like the most innocent guy you've ever seen in your life, right? Like, he is like, if an AI generated a centrist dad, it would come out with Keir Starmer, right? But, what do you think Keir Starmer was like in his 20s? Do you think he was a centrist dad in his 20s? Do you think he was like me in the suits right now? Let me show you what Keir Starmer was like in his 20s. Boom! There he is. There he is, lying on the floor with a broccoli head haircut next to a skull. And as you can see, Keir Starmer back when he was in his 20s, and I believe, he must have been part of some sort of alternative social movements, right? A little bit edgy, a little bit out there, right? Certainly, imagine him dressing like that today, with this sleeveless shirt, with skulls next to him. He would have never become Prime Minister. People would be like, what's wrong with this guy? Grow up. Right? But this is an example of personality refinement. When you're 20, you probably don't really think, or in your 20s, you don't really think about politics. You can kind of dress funky and, have a little bit of style and be a bit laissez-faire. But when you grow older, you want to be a serious politician. You want to affect society or have a career. Because remember, he was a lawyer before he was a politician. You have to dress a little bit as expected. You have to calm yourself down a little bit. You have to be a little bit more refined. And that, there's nothing particularly wrong with that. But right, that's an example of personality refinement in a social sense. Perhaps my friend is an example of refinement in an economic sense. This is an example of refinement in a social sense, right? So it's a prime example of how unrefined personalities become refined. And again, in order to understand that, you've got to look in the middle, the lawyer, the politician. So, the bottom line is that people in the 20 to 24 age bracket have unrefined personalities that are typically unrepresentative of who they will become with greater life experience and thus refinement, right? So when people are 20 to 24, no life experience, they get life experience, they change. I want to talk about, moving on to number 3, collective unrefinement, right? Because a lot of unrefined personalities are merely overreactions to the flaws of the establishment of the time, and this can be observed by many youth counterculture movements throughout history. So, for example, the 1960s establishment was very, very warish, very corrupt, and very, for example, you had the Vietnam War going on. You had JFK's assassination. The World War II was within living memory for the vast majority of people, right? It was just coming off the back of the ultra sort of conservative 1950s, right, with the strict nuclear family. But the main theme of the 1960s was corruption, war, instability, but specifically war. Like humanity had just come out within living memory of the largest war of all time, and yet America is fighting in Vietnam. We've got people getting assassinated, presidents getting assassinated. Like, it's a very violent establishment, really. If you really think back to what America and the UK, for example, was like back then. And so it shouldn't really be surprising then that the youth counterculture was all about peace and love, and it was all about expressing yourself and being calm and being cool and not really having a lot of pressure and calm down, man. Like 1960s hippie counterculture, for example, was just taking the establishment culture of the time and doing the opposite, right? If the establishment was war, corruption, be serious, the 1960s counterculture was no peace, calm, be cool, and again, all the 1960s hippie counterculture was just an overreaction of the 1960s establishment, right? That's all it was. And you saw that in the people who had unrefined personalities, their early 20s, back then. But at some point, all those hippies, later on in life, became suit-wearing, businessmen, the average citizens. And the reason for that is because at some point in life, I can't give a specific year, but it becomes uncool to be a hippie in a tent in a field, having intercourse with other hippies 24/7, right, and doing mushrooms or whatever. There's a certain age where that went from being cool to being sad. Maybe around it, if you're a hippie living in a tent dancing to psychedelic Doors music, and you're like 22 or whatever, that might be okay. If you're doing that at 32, however, people would start to think that's a bit sad, right? There's a certain period where it becomes sad. And what ended up happening to the hippies is that it's simple, their personality refined. They realized, life can't just be peace and love. Like, I actually have to get a job, right? I can't just, be this stinky hippie for the rest of my life. Like this is, okay, we've danced, we've listened to the Doors album 500 times. Okay, now I want to do something with my life, right? Their personality refined. They saw with maturity why the establishment was as square as it was, if you want to put it that way. Same is true for the 1980s. You look back at the 1980s establishment, what was it all about? Capitalism, right? Order, conservatism. You had Reagan in America, Thatcher in the UK. It was all about hardcore capitalism. And communism, the Soviet Union, was on its last legs. It was falling apart in the 1980s. Yes, it might have collapsed in 1991, but it only collapsed because throughout the 80s it went through a serious period of instability. And the reality is that capitalism and conservatism were reigning supreme during this time. And so it shouldn't be a surprise then that the 1980s counterculture was anarchism, punks, right? It was about, smash the system, man, forget capitalism. We don't need capitalism. We don't need social conservatism. We don't need religion. Why can we not just do whatever the hell we want? And so this is what the youth came up with. It's an overreaction to the times they lived in, an overreaction to suit wearing, to order, to capitalism. It was just an ultimate embrace of chaos, and many would say ugliness, but intentional ugliness. That's what it was. And again, that's not surprising. That's just taking the times and flipping it on its head, which to a lot of young people, 20 to 24, with unrefined personalities, makes complete sense. But again, eventually these punks, they realised, like, oh, we're not going to have an anarchistic society, and if we did, it would probably be a lot worse than what we have now. Yes, capitalism has many downsides, but anarchism has only downsides. And, I would rather, maybe I should just participate in the system because I'm better off doing that than having a mohawk at the age of, like, 35, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, at some point, just like the hippies, it gets sad and people grow up and refine and move on. And lastly, the 2000s establishment, a lot of people, particularly I imagine people over 30, are going to get angry at me for what I'm about to say, but I think the 2000s was a very optimistic decade. The reason people will get angry at me for saying that is, of course, because the 2000s was all about the war on terror, right? You had 9/11 and then the invasions of the Middle East and the endless, the threats of terrorism and the fear of terrorism. The 90s was certainly much more optimistic, but what people don't understand is that the leadership of the 2000s back then always reiterated that we can't let terrorism ruin our lives, which is true, and that we're in control, and that we're not going to concede to this terror threat. And the media at large, and especially the technology, was very, and the way that governments acted was very optimistic, to be honest with you. Maybe put George Bush aside. It was very an optimistic time, the 2000s. Like, you had technology seemed cool, like there was very little criticisms of technology as well, like you might see today in the 2020s. Like, technology was seen as this universal good. You had a new millennium; it was a new era, right? We're in the future now. Governments like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, they were very happy, kind of. Things can only get better, governments, movements, Obama, hope and change. It was like, I think people in retrospect in the 2000s focused too much on the war on terror. Granted, that's hard to ignore, but they don't realise how happy and optimistic the media at large was. It was an optimistic time. It was a much more simple time as well. I'm sure a lot of people remember. And so the 2000s counterculture was what? It was emos, right? You had people with, jet black hair, life is pain, man. Like, why is everyone so optimistic? Like, life is pain, right? It was all about this romanticism of sadness, right? So the media at large is, like, happy and like, whoa, we're in the new millennium. And these guys are like, life is pain. Life sucks, actually. This is dumb, right? That was the countercultural movement. And people forget this today, but emos in the 2000s were everywhere. There was loads of people walking around listening to this sad music and having this long hair and, like, dyed hair. This was like a big deal back in the 2000s, and it countered the optimism of the time. But again, same thing. Eventually, when people hit their 20s, in their mid-20s, it becomes a little bit, insufferable to be an emo. People go, oh, you know what? I'm not going to be miserable for the rest of my life talking about how life is pain. Life isn't that bad. Life is pretty good, actually. I'm going to get a job and smile. Right? That's what happened here. That's why emos, back in the 2000s, they were all over the place. No, they're not. And it's because people realised, I can't, they're not going to be like that forever, right? They've just, at some point, you've just got to, you've just got to drop the trend, right? Have a smile. But this brings us to today, the confusing 2020s. And the reason this is confusing is because while neoliberalism is factually the 2020s establishment, for the general public, there is no universally recognised establishment or counterculture, but mere rival tribes within an illusionary conflict. That's a mouthful, but what it means is that there's no... Neoliberalism, which is social progressivism and economic conservatism, is factually the establishment. It's the establishment that runs all the nations of the Western world. Every election, that's what you get, neoliberalism, whether you vote left or right. That is the establishment, factually. But neoliberalism is a very elite ideology. Very few people will call themselves a neoliberal. Very few people will even understand what neoliberalism is. Most people are on one side of the aisle or the other. They are either hardcore on the left, meaning they're socially progressive, economically socialist, or they're hardcore on the right, meaning they're socially conservative, economically capitalist. And most people in the general public, the layman, fall into one of those two sides. They are not, however, neoliberals who are both at the same time, or half of each, you should say. People don't think that in that advanced terms. People are of the left or people are of the right. And this creates this very annoying scenario where people on the left, think that they are the counterculture, even though their social beliefs are the establishment. But the reason they think they're the counterculture is because their economics, socialism, is not the establishment. That is the counterculture. So it's half true that the left is the establishment and the left is the counterculture. The conservatives, however, they think they're the counterculture because their social beliefs are not in vogue. But conservative economics is in vogue, right? Capitalism is in vogue. And so that's only half true, right? So people on the left, socialists are the counterculture, and conservatives are the counterculture. Both of those two groups combined are the ultimate counterculture, right? The antithesis to neoliberalism. But if you're a social progressive, or if you're an economic, capitalist, you're not the counterculture. Like, you are the establishment. But very few people can recognize that, because very few people can separate social beliefs and economic beliefs into their own categories. People view them as lumped together in this bundle, which is just not true. It's just not true that you can believe in socialism, let's say, and you have to be progressive socially. Like, it's just not true. It's not true that you can, you have to be socially conservative, but you have to be a capitalist. Not true. Typically true, but not true necessarily. And so in this time, the lines are blurred between, the overall point is that the lines are blurred between the establishment and the counterculture for the layman, for the average person. And so the result is that people don't refine, right? Unlike in the past, where the hippies, the punks, and the emos, they kind of grew up out of having unrefined, personalities where they're going against the establishment of the time, because there is no clear establishment or clear counterculture in a totally domineering sense. People don't mature because they really believe that they are the counterculture and that the establishment's about to fall. But you've got two groups of people who believe this at the same time with opposing views. And so there's no refinement, there's no peace, basically. That there is just an endless conflict of an illusionary conflict where people think that they're about to win and they're not, right? Because unless you understand that neoliberalism is the real status quo, you will never refine. You'll never adapt, right? It's kind of like, what if the hippies had a chance to become the government? What if the punks had a chance to actually implement anarchism? What if the emos could prove once and for all that having, dyed hair was the way to go and that optimism is totally lame? They had no chance of doing any of those things. But in the 2020s, people think they do. People think that there really is a chance to have a progressive socialist, dictatorship, to have a Christian sort of capitalist dictatorship, right? Like, we can do this. But they don't realize that they can't. Like, you're playing an illusionary war, right? That's a difficult thing to comprehend, but I think hopefully I've explained that to the best of my ability. And this brings us to number 4, a process that I call Borgification, right? So I've never seen this show in my life, but apparently in this show called Star Trek, I was told that there's this species called the Borg, and I believe this is them. And the Borg are a hive mind, in the sense that they have some Star Trek lore nerd can correct me if I'm wrong, hopefully I'm right, but the Borg are apparently like, they're an individual species, right? So they, as you can see, they're just like humans. But their mind isn't individual. They have a collective hive mind. So all the Borg think the same thing. The Borg has a consensus on everything. And so there's when the Borg decides something, all the individual Borgs follow. It's a hive mind, essentially. It's Reddit. is what it is, basically. And what happens to people, I think, when they don't refine and when they're stuck in this illusionary tribal conflict, is that they become Borgs themselves. It's that, in a sense, they surrender their own individuality, their own means of critical thinking and reasoning, and they pool it into a tribe, an illusionary tribe, if you would, that does the thinking for them, right? Their political opinions and their opinions are already set in stone, and the tribe will determine what that is as a consensus. And it feels voluntary because they feel like they're part of the tribe. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. And so here's an example of what I call left-wing Borgs, right? So these are, and I've blocked out the names because I'm not trying to name and shame people here, but these are profiles on Twitter that I found, real profiles. These aren't fake. And if you read like the biographies, and I remember a biography is a powerful thing. That's meant to be a line or a paragraph that sums up what you're all about, right? And if you see what some of these people here have put, it's like, Rainbow Mafia, LGBT allies feed, go get one non-voter to vote blue, register to vote, Kamala Harris 2024, let's crush MAGA in November. Intelligent, strong, independent, learning, growing and thankful. Hashtag women's rights are humans' rights. We have a gun crisis. We fear for our democracy. Biden won. Liberal Democrat, hashtag proud blue. LGBTQ ally, basically these people are identifying themselves, their primary identification on this planet with political movements. And here's some other profiles, like, imagine Kamala Harris 2024, because democracy matters. Harris for president. You choose to put this as your banner, right? And people might say, oh, but Alex, these are bots, right? These aren't real people. I thought that as well, right? I've looked at these profiles individually and I've gone like, are you a bot? Are you just something to change people's minds in politics? But they're not. They're real people. These are real people who have Borgified themselves. They've surrendered their individuality and they've given it up to the collective left-wing hive mind, where it's all about, Trump is terrible, Kamala rules, all these different weird little things, like the obsession with certain social concepts. They've turned this into their entire personality, right? Like, they don't describe themselves in terms of their job or what they do or their religion, or I don't know, like they love their family or whatever. Usually, no, it's about like, I'm a Democrat, right? That's what it's about. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Democrat. I want to turn Texas blue, right? Like, it's like, that's your biography. Like, if you were writing a book about your life, the first page would be like, I want to turn Texas blue. Really? Is that like the most important thing in your life? But to the people who have Borgified themselves, it is. And the sad thing is, when you've met one of these people, you've met them all, because they're Borgs, right? They're all the same. They're all the same person. Here's some example of right-wing Borgs, right? Like, proud American, blah, 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 pro-life, pro-guns, vets first, back the blue, proud Southern patriot. I follow back all patriots. I'm here to re-elect Trump. Stay in your lane, Dems. MAGA is strong. Hashtag patriot. Hashtag MAGA. I'm a pure blood. Trump won and will win again. Patriot believer, Texas rancher, hashtag MAGA. Constitutional conservative, right? It's like, their entire personality is just Trump. Their entire personality is make America great again. Here's some profiles. It's like 100% ultra MAGA patriot Trump won. Like, your banner is Trump. I'm a political commentator, MAGA Trump. Like, your biography is Trump. They've given up. Their individuality has been given up for Donald Trump, right? Like, their life is Trump. If you opened a book that said their life, it would be, I love Trump on every page, everywhere. Like, there's no individuality here. There's just a collective hive mind. And it's interesting because I preach collectivism. I say, we're too individualistic as a society. We need to be more collectivistic. And then I see things like this and I go, no, not like that. Right? Like, whatever this is, not like this, And the consequences of Borgs is that they have fanatical hatred and devotion, right? Like there's this scene, and I know this is overdone. I know talking about 1984 is so overdone, but there's this scene in 1984 which is so good. It's called 2 Minutes Hate. And what they have is, you see this conference hall of party believers, the Ink Sock, which is like the ruling party, the dictatorship's party believers. And they have this TV where they show like the enemy, right? And they say like, these people are your enemy. And the crowd who are fanatically, they go crazy. They're like, boo, we screw you enemies. Like, I think it's East Asia was the enemy, right? So they're like, how, we despise the East Asia, like we despise that regime, blah, right? And they're just screaming at the TV, going crazy. And then it slowly fades out from the enemy into Big Brother, which is the ink sock kind of representative, the leader. And they instantly stop the anger and their faces are like this and they go, right, they're like, they turn happy. They're like, yes, that's Big Brother. That's ink. That's us. Yes, we love Big Brother. Big Brother. Right. So it's like they go from fanatical anger to fanatical happiness. And the point of that scene, obviously, it's fictional. It's not real. But the point of that scene is to demonstrate when people are fanatical, they can go from feeling feelings of pure hatred just by a visual representation of something to pure devotion just by the same thing in a second. Their face can go from to in about a second, right? That's not normal when you're emotionally sound. But when you're not emotionally sound, when you allow your thoughts and feelings to be determined so strongly by visual stimuli or propaganda, then your emotions are very easily 180'd. That's the point of that scene. And the reason I mention this is because you can see that today in how these Borgs respond to politicians today in at the time of recording, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. I mean, so for example, let's take the Democrats in America, the left-wingers. If you show them Kamala Harris, they'll be like, oh, Mommy Kamala's going to save America. Oh yeah, she's going to like, oh, she's so cool. Like, she's so flawless, right? Show them Trump and they're like, oh my God, it's the racist. It's that like this terrible guy. How dare you? Drumpf, right? They just go crazy. Kamala, Mommy Kamala, she's so cool. She's going to save America. How dare you? Like that's what it's like. Like you could genuinely, oh God, I wish I had this power. Every year in America or whenever it is, they have these Democratic National Conventions or Republican National Conventions where it's like all the political people go there. I would love to do something out of like 1984 where you show a picture of Trump and they all boo. You show a picture of Kamala and they all cheer. And it would prove the point. It would prove like just visual stimuli alone is enough to make these people riled, right? They can't see why people might not like Kamala, why people might like Trump. They're totally taken in by this emotional overreaction. It's the same thing with Republicans, by the way. Show them Trump and they're like, that's my president, the God Emperor, the King. You show them Kamala and they're like, how dare you, right? The King, oh my God, Trump, you're so amazing, like, you're so incredible. How dare you, you communist, you want to implement bread lines, and right? It's like, you can see it, you can see this fanatical hatred and devotion just from visual stimuli, this spitting of the mouth, this saliva going everywhere, this raw anger, but also this fanatical love. Like, I genuinely think that the people who like Kamala would take a bullet for her. The people who like Trump would take a bullet for them. Like, they would sacrifice their own lives even for these political avatars. And what they don't understand is that the avatars that these people represent, that the political movements that these people represent, isn't even the real discussion at hand. Like, the real discussion at hand is neoliberalism. And both of these people represent half of neoliberalism. And the half that they don't is never implemented when they're in power anyway, right? Like when Trump was president, America did not become more conservative. If Kamala became president, America will not become more progressive, really. It will be neoliberal. In both circumstances, it will be neoliberal, but the fanatical devotees, they insist, no, they're different. They're different. The enemy is correct. Your analysis of the enemy is true, but my guy is different. And it's like, no, they're not. Like, you're not even... The fact that you're so emotionally charged in these political avatars proves that you're not thinking straight. Like, you don't really understand what's going on here. And so, to give you some examples of fanatical hatred, like, here's an example from Reddit I found, and it's a venting subreddit, and it just says, I hate conservatives. If you're a conservative, F you. I don't care what your values are, F you. F your anti-LGBTQ views. F your right-wing propaganda. F your pro-life views. I could go on and on. Don't interact with me if you're conservative, F you. Right, so it's just like... Who is this guy? Like, just imagine this person hunched over a keyboard going, conservatives. Right, they're not thinking straight. Like, a person who is mentally sound and politically educated does not do this. They don't act in this way. This is this is not logical anymore. It's emotional. And the fact that they can't even understand why, like, even just one benefit of conservatism, like... Surely you can at least comprehend that. Like, if you can't even comprehend one benefit of conservatism or progressivism, then you're not thinking straight anymore. You're totally Borgified. You're totally tribal. Here's another one. You cannot vote for a Republican and be a good person. I'm sick of pretending like this is a radical opinion. I will never respect a person who votes for a conservative candidate. It is utterly disgusting what this party does to people, blah, 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 blah. And, you can read that if you want. I'm not going to read it all. But the biggest part is where they say, I have tons of conservative family and will never talk to them again once I'm old enough, whether they're nice to me or not, because they openly go out and vote for people who literally want it to be illegal. Like, basically, this is someone who's going through an unrefined personality. This is someone who's about 20, 22, 24. They live with their parents, and they're saying as soon as they can leave their parents' house, they're never going to talk to them again. Imagine never talking to the people who birthed you into the world because you disagree politically. Because you can't even comprehend why some people are Republicans or why some people are conservatives. You can't even comprehend it. They just view them as evil, the same way that the Ink Sock supporters viewed the East Asia regime as evil and never questioned their own big brother, right? It's the same logic. Unfortunately, I don't have an example of conservatives performing fanatical hatred, because every example that I could find of that would have to be censored to such a large degree that it basically isn't worth me reading. But there are examples of conservatives doing the same thing in reverse, right? Not understanding why some people might be drawn to progressivism, for example, or away from religion. Some examples of fanatical devotion. Fortunately, I do have a left-wing and a right-wing example this time. This is a tweet, right? This is one of the worst tweets I've ever seen in my life. Tim Walls is my dad. Kamal is my fun aunt who lives next door. They just found out I'm being bullied by the kid in my class, JD. When they try to talk to his dad, Don, it becomes clear that he's the real problem. They go back to their car. Kamala pulls out her cop badge. Tim grabs his old baseball bat. They walk back to Don's porch. As Tim reaches for the doorbell, they look at each other and smile. This is going to be fun. This tweet is weird for numerous reasons, but probably the biggest reason, apart from the violent implications of it, but probably the biggest reason is, imagine talking about political candidates and politicians like your own family, right? It links into what I said earlier. They are substituting their family for these political avatars, and these political avatars don't even know that these people exist. They don't even care about them, but to them they're everything. To the political avatars they're nothing, but to the people, the political avatars are everything. This is fanatical levels of devotion here. You can see why the tweet was deleted, because it's embarrassing. Here's another example. Guy gets a Trump tattoo on his leg. In Trump we trust. He's gonna have to live with that tattoo for the rest of his life. He's probably in what, 25, something like that. That tattoo will be there decades after Trump is forgotten about as a president, right? Politics changes all the time. 10 years ago, Obama was a big deal. Today, Obama's like a relic, right? He's not involved in politics anymore. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Clinton, big deal in American politics, not anymore. Imagine having a Clinton tattoo or an Obama tattoo in the 2020s. People would be like, gosh, that's a relic, right? It's going to be the same thing here. But they feel so strongly about these people that they have to show it. By the way, I just want to point out, and I might be wrong about this, the worst thing about this tattoo is that the guy who had it isn't even an American. He's British, I think. Which is like another layer of like, what the hell is going on here? I mean, that's like, I think tattoos are the ultimate symbol of fanatical devotion, really. I mean, that's way worse than the tweet. The tweet can at least be deleted, right? The tattoo cannot be deleted. I tell you this, I hope that there's so many embarrassing tattoos lately. I don't want to go on a tangent, but God, the company that comes up with like easy tattoo removals it's gonna be a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, my word, that's gonna be so popular in the future. But they also have delusions of grandeur, right? Like, one of the reasons that keeps people Borgified is because they think that they're doing something. So, for example, the left-wingers, they look in the mirror and they see this white knight saviour of democracy against a rising fascist tyranny that hates those different to them, right? One of the things that progressives always do, they go on about the Handmaid's Tale. Have you heard about this? It's like this fictional universe that was written by a feminist where it's like women are like living in this conservative theocracy, and they're only like in this fictional world, their only purpose is to reproduce, and it's like, and whenever you hear about abortion or anything anti-feminist, you've got legions of people who talk about the Handmaid's Tale. You know, it's like the Handmaid's Tale. You know, like, this is, you know, like, we literally live in the Handmaid's Tale. Like, this is ridiculous. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, this is, you don't live in the Handmaid's Tale. Like, it's nothing like the Handmaid's Tale. Like, people don't like the idea of people being murdered. That's not the Handmaid's Tale, right? Like, stop believing in these delusions of grandeur where you're more, one, you think you're more important than you are, but two, you think what you're doing is more important than it really is. Like, no. Like, yes, there are some people who would want to turn America into a conservative theocracy. They're not the majority. They're nowhere near the majority. You do not live in the Handmaid's Tale. You are not a white knight. Same thing on the right. You know, you've got people who view themselves as a rebel agent against the globalist New World Order that wants us to eat bugs and live in pods. And it's like, okay, let's say that was true. Let's say there really is a global New World Order that wants you to eat bugs and live in a pod. How on earth is you making tweets going to solve that? Right? Like, how is you talking about Biden sucks, Kamala sucks? Like, what? You think the New World Order, who apparently controls all of the world, is going to care about your tweets, for example? No, of course they're not. Like, if you really live in that Deus Ex universe, you might as well work with the regime. You might as well go along with it, because clearly, if these guys are intelligent enough to take over the world without the majority of people even noticing, I would say they've deserved to take over the world. Right? That's an interesting way to think about it, right? But of course, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that these delusions of grandeur are false. Most of the left-wingers and most of the right-wingers who look in the mirror and see themselves in this way, they're not that way. In fact, they have very little stake in the society themselves at all, and that's why they believe in these delusions of grandeur. Because if you do nothing with your life, right, if you're just sat around on Twitter all day or Reddit all day or whatever, making bloody posts all day, you have to have some sort of coping mechanism for the fact that you have no effect on society at large and you have nothing individually, right? You have no, like, you're disconnected from your friends, your family, maybe you have no partner, whatever. You have to give yourself some meaning. And so you can fall into this hole of believing in these delusions because these delusions keep them going. Basically, they understand on a subconscious level that they have nothing going on as an individual. And so they Borgify themselves, believe these delusions of grandeur, believe that they are part of a greater struggle in which they are a hero, because it's much better to believe that you're a hero than accept that you're a loser. Right? And that sounds very harsh, but if you look at all these people who talk about how America is the Handmaid's Tale, or talk about how the world is Deus Ex or whatever, or that, you know, that you know, an apocalypse is going to happen or whatever. Like, it's always people who have nothing going on. You know, and like, the problem is with them, really. Like, yes, there's many problems in society, but the way you handle it is to work within that society. It's not to do whatever the hell this is and believe these fictions, right? But people enter this sort of state of mindlessness where, for example, The best example I can find of this is there's a guy on YouTube who has, as you can see, over 3 million subscribers, right? And he's like this science, he makes like scientific videos. I won't name and shame him because I've never interacted with him one-on-one. And again, I'm not about naming and shaming people here. I'm just using him as an example. But you might know who he is. And so he makes these science videos. He's got over 3 million subscribers, and you think like, wow, if someone has 3 million subscribers, that's a pretty big deal, right? Like that's like a very respectable creator. However, if you go on his Twitter, he was suspended, right? And that's a big juxtaposition. Like if you have 3 million subscribers on YouTube, but on Twitter you're suspended, why? Like what's going on there? Usually people who have millions of subscribers are very good with PR and public relations. Like they usually wouldn't get suspended from another platform, right? Especially a platform that from a commercial aspect could build their brand, if you would, even further. But the reason is because this person, and someone sent me their Twitter profile before it got suspended. But this person, it was absolutely fascinating to me from a sociological level. And the reason for that is because, you can read some of these tweets if you want. They would spend day in, day out, before they were suspended, just arguing with people endlessly. And they weren't just arguing with people, they were insulting people. Like every single tweet, like I'm not joking with you. This is going to make me sound a little bit strange, like a stalker or something, but when you observe people sociologically, when you find certain people that exhibit traits that are very extreme, such as being highly aggressive or highly argumentative on one end, but on the other end are also very successful in another endeavour, such as having 3 million subscribers, that's very fascinating from a sociological perspective because it highlights a sort of split personality, right? In essence, this person, when it comes to his forte, which is creating science videos, is very successful and very well liked. But then there's also this other side of him where when he interacts with people, he's rude, very rude, and fanatically so. This guy would spend about at least an hour a day on Twitter, 50 tweets a day maybe, just insulting people who disagreed with him. And the more angry and the more rude he got, the more people wanted to argue with him, right? And so it's almost like a self-defeating cycle, right? Where you're angry, you argue with people, that attracts more people and they argue with you. And it was fascinating to me observing this guy because I would check his profile every week or so. Because someone showed me and I would check it every week and I would see, like, is he still doing this? Like, is he still arguing with people? And every day, day in, day out, for hours on end, these are the kinds of things that he would say to people. Day in, day out, every day. And when he got suspended, I honestly felt relieved because I thought, like, this guy is really losing his marbles. Like he's in a state of mindlessness, and again, that's the point. This state of mindlessness, this Borgification. Oh, by the way, he would mostly argue with people about politics, right? About things like Israel and Palestine, or left wing versus right wing. So things that aren't even necessarily related to his forte of science, right? And he describes himself as like, I have a knack for explaining stuff. I'm a science communicator and things like that. But meanwhile, you look at the way he communicates and it's rude. It's unhinged. It's mindless. And so the point I'm trying to make with this story is that even people who are successful in one domain, very successful in one domain, very respected in one domain, they can fall victim to this mindlessness and completely lose control and spend hours a day arguing and being rude and completely unlike the way that they see themselves and the way that they necessarily may be under better conditions. It's very sad. But, by the way, it's not just, I've been talking about, to look at the stages of life here, I've been talking about unrefined personalities for the most part, like people who haven't sort of matured into adulthood properly, and their personality stays unrefined because it's not been tried and tested with life experience. People have these echo chambers that reinforce these values so that they never lose them. But I think that guy is actually an example of a different kind of arrested development, a kind of arrested development that happens in the 50s, let's say, usually, like in the later years, where it's like people have unrefined personalities. The personalities get refined, but then the transition from being a young adult to a middle-aged adult, or a middle-aged adult to an old adult, especially the latter, doesn't work properly, in essence. So kind of like the transition from a teenager to an adult, the transition from a middle-aged adult to a late adult also malfunctions, if that makes sense. So an example I want to give is of a late unrefined personality is, I know, sort of like a family friend, if you would, a 55-year-old woman, and her actual family, her husband, she has offspring, but her offspring have moved out, and so she lives with her husband. And her husband's like the most miserable guy on earth. And he's clearly very like depressed and very miserable and sad, and he's not happy whatsoever. And whenever you see her and him together, they're completely miserable as sin. But then all this woman cares about, like, she doesn't talk to her husband. She doesn't say, like, why are you so sad? Why are we why are we not as close as we used to be anymore? Like, what's going on here? All she cares about is the royal family. Right? So, like, you ask her about Meghan Markle or Prince Harry or Diana or Camilla or whatever, they'll talk to you about it, till kingdom come, right? They know everything about the royal family, but they don't know anything about their own family, right? They don't talk to their husband. They don't talk to they don't really even necessarily keep track of their offspring. Like, oh, I wonder what Dave's doing. I wonder what Phil's doing. Like, their sons. I view this as an example of an unrefined personality, in the sense that, and you see this with a lot of, I don't want people to get the impression that unrefined personalities and arrested development of this caliber is a problem that only occurs with people who are 20 to 24 and onwards. It can also happen to people who have offspring, or who are old, but haven't something goes wrong in their development from a middle-aged adult to an older adult, and they substitute their individuality and their own family and the things going on in their own lives for other people's lives. And you see this in the UK with, like, these hordes of women in their 40s and 50s and 60s who never talk to their own husbands, but they'll watch endlessly about the royal family, a family they've probably have nothing to do with, never met, and doesn't even know they exist, right? And I think a lot of people might be able to relate to that in a way. Like, maybe people might have parents, for example, who, I don't know, like, your parents might, be obsessed with the royals or with politicians, or, I saw this video of this woman in America, and she lived in this house. She was an older woman. She was about 50. And she lived in this apartment that was just covered in animal feces. Like, she had a little chihuahua or something, and she just allowed it to crap everywhere. And her apartment was a mess, and she looked like a mess. She was like dirty shirt and, whatever. And there was a clip where Trump was, like, sent to court or something like that. Like, he was found guilty in court for some crime he did or something. And she was yelling at the TV, like, yes, he's going to jail, and she was, like, laughing and yelling at the TV. I don't know who was recording it. It was, like, recording her on the sofa, like, yelling at the TV. And the dog looks confused and he's looking at her like, what? Like, what's wrong with her? Like, why is she so happy? Like, what's going on? And I just thought to myself, like, my God, like, that is one of the saddest things that you've ever seen in your life, isn't it, really? Because, you got to think, like, when did that happen? Like, how can you be so happy to hear that news? Like, how can you have so little going on in your own life that, Trump being put in court or something would make you flip out in such a way? Like, fanatical laughter, fanatical happiness. It's sad. Anyway, overall, number 5, what to take away here. This is really good, I think. The Screwtape Letters was a book written by C.S. Lewis. In it, a senior demon known as Screwtape writes to his protege, Wormwood, who was working on preventing the spiritual maturity of a human man known as the Patient. Right? Pay attention to this, because I think this is really good. My dear Wormwood, be sure that the patient remains completely fixated on politics. Arguments, political gossip, and obsessing on the faults of people they have never met serves as an excellent distraction from advancing in personal virtue, character, and the things the patient can control. Make sure to keep the patient in a constant state of angst, frustration, and general disdain towards the rest of the human race in order to avoid any kind of charity or inner peace from further developing. Ensure that the patient continues to believe that the problem is out there in the broken system, rather than recognizing there is a problem with himself. Keep up the good work. I absolutely love this because even though, again, it's just fiction, I don't think a paragraph has summarized unrefined personalities, arrested development as best as that. That is exactly what these people are doing. They are looking outwards rather than looking inwards, and they are corrupting themselves and sacrificing themselves for a movement that is illusionary, is going nowhere, and doesn't necessarily even exist in the way that they think it does. And the end result of that is not that the world, the utopia that they're trying to create actually comes to fruition. The result is that they destroy themselves. And in years and decades gone by, if they're honest with themselves, they'll look back and go, why have I wasted so much time being so angry, so sad, and being such a douchebag, and pushing people aside, whether it be friends or family, for this movement of which doesn't even really exist. That's a really powerful realization. Of course, many people don't come to that realization because the longer you've done it, you have a sunken cost fallacy where, if you've spent 5 years being a political lunatic, well, I mean, in order to admit that you're wrong, you would have to admit that you've wasted 5 years. Very difficult for people to do that, but I love that. And, I did a poll on Twitter, right, where I asked people, would you describe anyone you know in reality as being completely lost to politics? So basically, someone who's being corrupted by wormwood, right? 75% of people said yes, and only 25% of people said no. So 3/4 of people who I asked know someone, whether friends, family, or even themselves, who they think is lost to politics. Someone who has sacrificed their individuality for this illusionary collective tribe. Someone who has forgotten what it means to be a human being. And I'll be honest with you, when I made this poll, I thought no would be the majority. I thought it would be about maybe about 70% no, 30% yes, and then I would say, well, look, that's still disturbing, the fact that 1/3 of people know someone like this, but the fact that it's 3/4 is even more disturbing. Anyway, look, the overall point here, and I know that I'm going to get some angry comments about this. Look, I'm not saying that people shouldn't care about politics, right? I'm not saying that people should just lay in bed, eat potato chips, drink Mountain Dew and go, oh, who cares about politics, man? Like, relax, brother. Like, let's just take it easy. Like, who cares about... No, you have to care about politics, right? Politics is important. Politics is the way your country's ran, the laws of your country. The culture of your country. Like, of course you have to care about politics. I'm not saying for 1 second don't care about politics. How could I? I've made so many productions and lectures on politics that I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I said don't care about politics. But what I am saying, right, is if you're going to care, do so effectively, right? Join a political party. Get involved in politics. Vote for a political party. It baffles me the amount of political fanatics online who don't vote. They'll talk endlessly about politics. They have to spend 5 minutes going out to tick a box. Oh, too difficult. Or become an activist, right? Make your own videos, make your own productions or lectures or whatever. Like, make your own, songs, literature. Like, get involved in the society rather than just observing it from the outside and bitterly being angry about it on social media. Just like, I hate Trump. I hate Kamala. This sucks, right? Like all you're doing by doing that is destroying yourself, right? All you're doing is making yourself miserable, making yourself stressed, and making yourself angry, and feeling like so insignificant that you're a cog in a machine, and you have to fully devote yourself to this illusionary tribe, or you'll get nowhere. Sorry, but that's just not how it works. Society is made up of individuals, and the individuals work together to to make that society what it is, if you just atomize yourself, become this faceless, personalityless Borg, you never become the best version of yourself. Society doesn't gain anything from the best version of yourself. You just become this bitter, angry demon, right? Literally, just like the screw tape and wormwood scenario. You just become like a demon controls you, and they add nothing to the world, and they isolate themselves from their friends and family and everyone. Nothing comes of this mindset, of this mindless tribalism. Like, try to understand why people are progressive, conservative, socialist, capitalist. Don't be so emotionally ingrained. And if you really do care about it still after that, which most people don't when the emotions are put aside, then get involved in it intellectually, right? But just don't corrupt the self. Don't lose the self. Don't forget what life is about, if that makes sense. I don't know. So I hope I've explained that to the best of my ability. That the reason I made this, by the way, is because I'm so sad of seeing so many people who I know, or even who I don't know, who are just miserable as sin, right? And I get it. There's many problems today. I talk about a lot of these problems myself, and it's a difficult time in many ways. But you can't lose yourself because of it. You can't forget who you are as a result. You have to remember, like, you're a person, and there's only so much you can do, but you should focus on the self as well. When you think about it this way, how can you affect the collective that you care so much about if you yourself as an individual is weak? Surely you have to level up yourself, make yourself from the pawn into like the king in terms of the chess pieces, right? In order to affect the society, right? Very few people, I feel like, understand that. And if you try and tell them that, they become hostile to you, because they know that you're telling the truth. They know that what you're saying is true, but they don't want to hear it. Because it's much easier to languish in self-pity and tribalism and echo chambers than it is to be brave and admit that realization and do something about it, right? AKA improving the self. All right, hopefully that makes sense. All right, folks, that's all. That's all for now. What are your thoughts on Arrested Development creating political fanatics? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you understand what I'm talking about? I know I reckon it's going to be 50-50 on this one. I think there's going to be some people who say that they don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and think that this is totally normal. But I also think there'll be some who go, look, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen people like this, or maybe I've been like this myself. I know I have. God, I know I have it in the past. When I was like 18, 19, 20, absolutely. But, I think you slowly get out of it. But some people don't slowly get out of it. And that's, I kind of want to take these people and go, stop. Stop being like this. But I don't know. Anyway, I want to thank the Wall of Famers as ever. Thank you very much. I am, as ever, beyond. I say this every time, and I always think it comes across as empty, but I really am genuinely grateful. It's so kind for your support. And hey, you can find me on X/Twitter. I might do some more polls on there in the future. So if you're interested in being a part of the stats on here, go ahead. And hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully the yellow background has made people remain calm. But yeah, anyway, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.